Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The room was suffocating in its silence, the ticking of the antique wall clock echoing louder than ever before. Michael leaned against the bedroom doorframe, his arms crossed tightly as if to physically hold himself together. The once warm haven of his home now felt cold and alien, haunted by the ghost of something he couldn't quite name. The bed, neatly made, only highlighted the absence of his wife, Claire. Her side of the room was untouched, save for the faint scent of jasmine mixed with something sharper, unfamiliar, intrusive. "I trusted her," he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. He glanced at the picture frame on the bedside table, their smiles frozen in time. 10 years. A decade of shared laughter, tears, and dreams. But now, every memory felt tarnished, its edges blurred with doubt. The signs had been subtle at first, easily dismissed. Late nights at work were normal in her field, or so he had convinced himself. The whispered phone calls, the hastily muted conversations when he entered the room, and the way her hand lingered just a moment too long on her scarf as she unwound it after another mysterious meeting. Michael had waved them off, clinging to the Claire he thought he knew. Then came the voicemail. It had been an accident, an unexpected glitch in the universe's cruel design. His phone had buzzed late that evening as he worked on a new architectural proposal, the ringtone slicing through his concentration. He reached for it absent-mindedly, expecting a routine notification or a call from his project manager. But what greeted him instead was a voice message. "See you at our usual spot. You'll never suspect." The man's voice was unfamiliar, deep, and laced with smugness. Michael's hand had trembled as he replayed the message, the words digging into his chest like shards of glass. His first instinct had been denial. Claire was devoted, loyal. The thought of her even entertaining another man seemed absurd. Still, the evidence was mounting. The past few weeks replayed in his mind like a cruel montage. The scent of cologne on her scarf. Citrusy masculine. The work meetings that always seemed to stretch past midnight. The way her smile no longer reached her eyes when they talked. Michael had chalked it up to the pressures of their busy lives, the stress of her new project, or even his own paranoia. But now, the puzzle pieces were beginning to form a sinister picture. He picked up the scarf from the back of the chair, bringing it close to his nose. The scent was faint but undeniable. Closing his eyes, he gritted his teeth against the surge of anger and hurt. He wanted to confront her, demand answers, scream until the walls shook. But something held him back, a gnawing fear of confirmation. Michael sank into the armchair by the window, his head in his hands. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, indifferent to the storm brewing within him. He pulled out his phone, hesitating before pressing play on the voicemail again. "See you at our usual spot. He'll never suspect." The words echoed like a mocking refrain, daring him to act. He stared at the screen, his reflection staring back, hollow-eyed and weary. His thumb hovered over Claire's name in his contacts, the temptation to call her and demand an explanation nearly overwhelming. But no, he needed to know more. He needed proof. The next few days were a blur of forced smiles and feigned normalcy. Michael became a shadow in his own home, watching, listening, cataloging every interaction. He noticed the way Claire's laughter seemed brighter when she glanced at her phone, the way she clutched her purse tighter than usual. Each observation chipped away at the foundation of his trust, leaving him with nothing but jagged pieces. One evening, as Claire stepped out for yet another late meeting, Michael's resolve hardened. He grabbed his coat and keys, following her into the cold night. The hunt had begun. The hotel lobby buzzed with quiet elegance, its polished marble floors gleaming under the golden glow of crystal chandeliers. Michael sat at the edge of the bar, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses as he sipped an untouched glass of whiskey. His heart hammered against his ribs, the weight of his suspicions crushing him. He had always been a man who thrived on control, measuring twice before cutting, analyzing every angle before committing. But this was a world he wasn't prepared for. The world of betrayal. Claire's laughter pierced the air, drawing Michael's attention like a magnet. It was carefree, almost childlike, and it cut deeper than any blade. Hidden behind the towering marble column, he adjusted his position to get a clearer view. There she was, Claire, his wife of 10 years, the woman who had held his hand through sleepless nights and celebrated every milestone in his career. But now, she was holding someone else's hand, Daniel, her co-worker. Michael's breath hitched as he watched Claire lean into Daniel, her fingers brushing his forearm as they spoke. The intimacy between them was unmistakable, the kind of unspoken connection that needed no words. Then, to his horror, Claire kissed him. Not a fleeting peck on the cheek, but a lingering kiss that spoke of familiarity, passion, and comfort. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Michael's mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and anger. A small part of him had hoped, prayed, that he was wrong, that the late nights, the hushed phone calls, and the perfume weren't signs of an affair, but simple misunderstandings. But now he had seen it with his own eyes. For a long time, Michael sat frozen in his spot, his hands trembling. He wanted to storm over, demand answers, make a scene. But then, reason took hold. This wasn't just about Claire's infidelity. There was something deeper at play, something that demanded patience and calculation. Over the next week, Michael's life became an exercise in controlled chaos. His daytime hours were spent managing his architectural firm, his nights consumed by unraveling the web of lies that Claire had woven around him. He began piecing together her movements, cross-referencing her work schedule with their joint bank account transactions. What he found left him reeling. There were unexplained withdrawals, thousands of dollars siphoned from their savings under the guise of work expenses, hotel bookings under fake names, all linked to Daniel's favorite meeting spots. A credit card statement showed purchases of high-end gifts, none of which Michael had ever seen at home. But the real blow came when Michael accessed Claire's laptop while she was in the shower. Her email inbox told a story he wasn't prepared to read. Cryptic messages between her and Daniel painted a picture of not just an affair, but a life planned without him. Once everything's finalized, we'll be free, just a little longer. He's too blind to see it coming. You're incredible, worth every risk. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated deceit. Claire wasn't just stepping out of their marriage, she was actively dismantling the life they'd built together. Michael's fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to leave a response, to reveal that he knew, but he stopped himself. Emotional outbursts wouldn't solve this. He needed to be smarter, colder, more precise. He took screenshots of everything, storing them on a hidden drive. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of the marriage he'd once cherished. But as the days went on, Michael began to notice a pattern in the chaos, something far more sinister than he had anticipated. Claire wasn't acting alone. There were transactions in their joint account that weren't tied to Claire or Daniel, but to a third party, a shell company registered under Daniel's name. Further investigation revealed that Claire had been funneling money into this account, money that wasn't just hers, it was theirs. Michael's architectural firm had a savings fund, one they had built for emergencies and future investments. It was supposed to be untouchable, but Claire had somehow accessed it. Over $50,000 had been siphoned in small, unnoticeable increments over the past year. It wasn't just personal betrayal anymore, it was financial sabotage. Michael knew he couldn't let her continue unchecked. He needed to protect what was his, not just for himself, but for the people who depended on him, his employees, his clients, and the reputation he had spent years building. One evening, while Claire was out working late, Michael made his move. He contacted an old friend, a private investigator named Greg, who specialized in uncovering hidden financial dealings. Michael handed over everything he had, the bank statements, the emails, the shell company records. "This isn't just an affair, Greg," Michael said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "This is theft, and I need to know how deep it goes." Greg nodded, his expression grim. "We'll find out, Michael, but you need to be ready for what we uncover. It's rarely just one thread. It's a whole web." Michael spent the next few days in quiet anticipation, his routine unchanged, his demeanor calm. Claire had no idea he was onto her. She continued her deceit, blissfully unaware that the man she thought she had fooled was slowly dismantling her scheme. As Michael sat alone in his office one night, poring over the blueprints for his next project, he felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about reclaiming his life, the life she had tried to steal. And when the time came, Michael vowed he would strike with the precision of an architect, deliberate, calculated, and devastating. Michael sat in his office late at night, staring at the flickering screen of his laptop. The evidence he'd gathered lay organized in digital folders, each labeled with cold precision: bank statements, emails, surveillance photos. Every click brought him face to face with Claire's betrayal. Yet it wasn't the affair itself that kept him awake. It was the scale and intent behind her actions. His life had been turned into a cruel game, and he was the unwitting pawn. The Claire he thought he knew, his partner, his confidant, his wife, had unraveled before his eyes, replaced by someone he could barely comprehend. A woman capable of theft, deceit, and betrayal so profound it seemed almost calculated. The financial discrepancies were staggering. Beyond the siphoned savings and shell accounts, Michael uncovered falsified loan applications tied to their shared assets. Claire had borrowed against their home equity, disguising the debt as funds for home renovations. But the money hadn't gone into their home. It had vanished into the same black hole as the savings. And then there were the investments. Michael's firm had taken careful steps to diversify its portfolio. Claire, entrusted with managing their personal finances, had made changes to those investments. Silent, unauthorized adjustments that funneled returns into private accounts under her name. As the weight of the truth settled over him, Michael fought to maintain focus. He knew despair was dangerous, an indulgence he couldn't afford. He had to act, and he had to act wisely. He opened his email and typed a message to Greg, the private investigator. Subject: urgent. Next steps. Greg, I've compiled everything we discussed. Need you to prioritize financial assets and cross-reference the investments Claire redirected. I also need insight into Daniel's financials, specifically the shell company Claire's tied to. Time sensitive. Let me know if you need anything further. Michael. Hitting send, Michael leaned back in his chair, his head pounding. The sound of rain against the windows filled the room, steady and relentless. It mirrored the turmoil in his chest. His mind raced with questions he didn't want to answer. How long had she been planning this? Did she ever truly love him, or had their marriage always been a convenient facade? By morning, he was no closer to peace. Michael went through the motions of his day with mechanical precision, attending meetings and approving designs for his latest project. His team didn't notice his distraction, and for that he was grateful. He wore his professional mask with practiced ease, hiding the storm brewing within. But the nights were unbearable. Alone in their sprawling home, He wandered from room to room, haunted by the echoes of memories that now felt hollow. The dining table where they had celebrated anniversaries, the living room where they'd exchanged holiday gifts, the kitchen where they had shared countless late-night conversations, they were all tainted. One night, as Michael sat in the dim light of the kitchen, he heard the faint creak of the front door. It was Claire. She entered quietly, likely assuming he was asleep. She froze when she saw him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You're up late," she said, her voice carefully casual. Michael studied her, noting the faint smudge of lipstick on her collar and the scent of expensive wine that clung to her. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, his tone even. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to engage further. "Rough day at work?" Michael smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Something like that." Claire lingered in the doorway, then murmured, "I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late." As she disappeared up the stairs, Michael's hand tightened around the coffee mug he was holding. It took every ounce of restraint not to confront her right then and there. But he reminded himself of his plan. Confrontation would give her power. Evidence would take it away. The next day, Greg's first comprehensive report arrived. It was worse than Michael had imagined. Daniel wasn't just Claire's lover. He was her accomplice in a much larger scheme. The shell company they were funneling money into had ties to other high-profile fraud cases. Daniel had a history of seducing influential women to gain access to their resources. Claire wasn't his first partner in crime, though she was proving to be his most ambitious. The revelation that stung the most, however, was the timeline. Greg's investigation showed the affair had started nearly 2 years ago. 2 years of deception. 2 years of Claire lying to his face, sharing their bed and pretending their life was still whole. Michael's rage simmered beneath the surface, but his mind remained clear. He couldn't afford to lose control. He scheduled another meeting with Greg to discuss the next phase of their investigation. As days turned into weeks, Michael's carefully constructed facade remained intact. He played the role of the unsuspecting husband while working tirelessly behind the scenes. With Greg's help, he froze their joint accounts and restructured his business finances to ensure Claire couldn't touch them. He also began securing personal assets, transferring property titles, and ensuring their home was protected from Claire's machinations. But it wasn't enough to protect himself. He wanted justice. One evening, Greg brought Michael additional evidence. Claire and Daniel had been in contact with a competitor firm, subtly leaking details of Michael's upcoming projects. It wasn't just betrayal, it was sabotage. "They're trying to ruin me," Michael said, his voice low but firm. Greg nodded. "And they're counting on you to do nothing about it? They think you're blind to all of this." "They're wrong," Michael replied, a spark of determination igniting in his chest. That night, Michael began crafting his strategy. He documented everything, every transaction, every email, every photograph. His engineering mind approached the problem methodically, dissecting each layer of deceit and building a case so airtight that Claire and Daniel wouldn't be able to wiggle free. His plan wasn't just about exposing them. It was about reclaiming his life. He envisioned the confrontation, not as an emotional outburst, but as a calculated moment of clarity. He would strip away their illusions of control, revealing their treachery to the world. And then he would watch them fall. The climax of his quiet war approached as Michael prepared for the dinner party, a gathering Claire had insisted on hosting, ostensibly to network with potential investors. She had no idea he was using it as a stage for her unmasking. In the days leading up to the event, Michael rehearsed his every word, every move. His rage had been honed into a weapon, sharp and precise. He wasn't just confronting Claire. He was dismantling her web of lies in front of an audience. As the night of the party drew near, Michael felt an eerie sense of calm. For weeks, he had endured the pain of her betrayal in silence. Now, he was ready to reclaim his voice. By the end of the night, Claire would know that Michael was no pawn. He was the architect of her undoing. the night of the dinner party arrived with an air of expectation. The Porters' home sparkled with life, its grand rooms lit by the glow of chandeliers and the hum of animated conversations. Claire had spent the entire day fussing over every detail, directing the catering staff, adjusting floral arrangements, and overseeing the seating chart. To an outsider, she was the picture of a devoted wife throwing a flawless event to support her husband's career. Michael, however, saw her differently. Every graceful move she made, every polite smile she offered to their guests, was a mockery of the woman she had once pretended to be. He stood in the corner of the living room, sipping a glass of wine and surveying the scene with practiced calm. The crowd was a mix of business associates, investors, and friends. Daniel arrived fashionably late, his tailored suit immaculate, his charm turned up to its maximum setting. Claire greeted him at the door with a warm hug that lingered just a beat too long. Michael clenched his jaw but remained still, letting them play their game. They thought they were in control. The dining room was an opulent display of wealth and sophistication, the long mahogany table set with fine china and crystal glasses. As the evening progressed, laughter and clinking glasses filled the space. Claire flitted between conversations, her laugh ringing out like a melody, while Daniel held court with a group of investors, his easy confidence winning them over. Michael bided his time, his outward demeanor calm and congenial. He engaged in light conversation, ensuring he was never far from Claire or Daniel. He needed them to feel secure, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Midway through the evening, as dessert was being served, Michael rose from his seat at the head of the table and tapped his glass with a spoon. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady. "This evening is about celebrating trust and collaboration, values that are the foundation of both successful relationships and businesses." He let the words hang in the air, watching as Claire's smile froze and Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "But trust," Michael continued, his tone sharpening, "is not something to be taken lightly, and when it's broken, the consequences can be devastating." The room was utterly silent now, the cheerful atmosphere replaced with a tense undercurrent. Claire's eyes darted toward Daniel, who sat rigid, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his glass. Michael reached under the table and produced a folder, its contents thick with evidence. He placed it on the table with deliberate care. "I've recently come across some information that has forced me to reevaluate the meaning of trust in my own life." He opened the folder, pulling out the first set of documents, bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers from their joint account. "Claire," he said, his gaze locking onto her, "do you recognize these? They're records of money being funneled out of our savings." Claire's face paled, her carefully composed mask slipping. "Michael, He held up a hand, silencing her. "Please, let me finish." Next, he displayed the photographs Greg had taken, images of Claire and Daniel at hotels, restaurants, and private meetings. Gasps rippled through the room as the damning evidence was passed around. Daniel leaned forward, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. "This is ridiculous," Daniel blustered. "You've obviously misunderstood." Michael cut him off. "Misunderstood? Let me clarify further." He pulled out a series of emails detailing Claire and Daniel's communications about the shell company and their plans to siphon funds from his business. "I've already reported these activities to your employer," Michael said, his voice cold. "They were particularly interested in how you've been using company resources to further your schemes, Daniel." The tension in the room was palpable as Michael continued. "The authorities have also been informed. In fact," he added, glancing toward the front door, "I believe they're on their way as we speak." As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Michael had arranged for the police to arrive precisely at this moment, a calculated move to drive his point home. Claire stood, her voice trembling. "Michael, please, let's discuss this privately." Michael turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Privately?" You mean the way you and Daniel have been discussing our finances, our marriage? The doorbell rang, and a hush fell over the room. Two officers entered, their presence a stark contrast to the glamorous surroundings. "Daniel Carter," one officer said, stepping forward, "we need you to come with us." Daniel's confidence evaporated. "This is absurd," he shouted as the officers cuffed him. "You'll regret this, Michael." "I already regret ever trusting you," Michael replied, his voice calm. The room erupted into murmurs and whispers as Daniel was escorted out. Claire sank into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Michael turned to the remaining guests, his tone shifting. "I apologize for the disruption, but I felt it was important to address this situation directly. Please, enjoy the rest of the evening." The party disbanded soon after, the air thick with shock and speculation. Michael stayed behind, watching as Claire gathered her things. "Michael, I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. Michael looked at her, his expression hard as steel. "You didn't mean to betray me? To steal from me? To ruin everything we built?" Tears streamed down her face, but Michael felt nothing. "I'll be filing for divorce in the morning," he said, "and I'll make sure you walk away with nothing." As Claire left the house, Michael felt a strange sense of peace. He had faced the betrayal head-on and emerged stronger. Hours later, Michael sat in his office, reviewing his plans for the community center. The betrayal was still fresh, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, it fueled his resolve to move forward, to rebuild his life on a foundation of truth and integrity. The echoes of the evening's events lingered in his mind, but for the first time in weeks, Michael allowed himself a small, genuine smile. The storm had passed, and he was still standing. The morning after the party dawned cold and gray, matching the chill that had settled into Michael's chest. He stood in the empty living room staring at the remnants of last night's gathering, the half-empty glasses, the crumpled napkins, the lingering scent of expensive perfume. It all seemed so trivial now, like a stage set for a play he never wanted to star in. Claire was gone. She had left a note on the kitchen counter, a rambling apology that did nothing to soothe the sting of her betrayal. The words blurred as Michael read them, their meaning hollow against the weight of what she had done. "I'm sorry, Michael. I never meant for this to happen. Please understand." He crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash. Her understanding was the last thing he needed. What he needed was clarity, direction, and the strength to rebuild the life she had tried to destroy. Michael's first call that morning was to his lawyer. Sitting in the sleek office overlooking the city, he laid out the evidence he had meticulously gathered, every bank statement, every email, every photograph. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn, nodded approvingly as she flipped through the folder. "You've done your homework," she said. "With this, you'll have no trouble securing the divorce on your terms. She won't walk away with a dime." "That's the goal," Michael replied, his voice steady. "I want her out of my life completely." Evelyn paused, studying him carefully. "And the business? Are you prepared for any fallout from Daniel's involvement?" Michael nodded. "I've already started insulating the company. Our investors are aware of what happened, and they've assured me of their continued support. Daniel's actions won't jeopardize what I've built." The meeting ended with a plan of action, one that would ensure Michael's financial and professional security. As he left the office, he felt a flicker of relief. For the first time in weeks, he had a clear path forward. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Michael threw himself into his work, finalizing plans for the community center and overseeing its construction with renewed focus. His team noticed the change in him, the way he carried himself with quiet determination, the sharpness of his insights during meetings. "He's like a man possessed," one colleague remarked to another. But Michael wasn't just working to distract himself. He was reclaiming his sense of purpose, rediscovering the passion that had driven him to become an architect in the first place. The betrayal no longer felt like a wound. It was a scar, a reminder of what he had survived. Outside of work, Michael's life underwent a transformation. He moved into a new apartment, a sleek, modern space overlooking the city. It was smaller than the house he had shared with Claire, but it felt liberating, unburdened by memories of their life together. He began reconnecting with old friends, people he had unintentionally drifted away from during his marriage. Coffee dates turned into dinners, and dinners turned into nights of laughter and honest conversation. For the first time in years, Michael felt like himself again. He also began therapy, something he had resisted at first, but quickly came to value. Sitting across from a compassionate, no-nonsense therapist, he unpacked the layers of anger, grief, and betrayal that had consumed him. Betrayal has a way of making us question everything, the therapist said during one session. But it doesn't define you, Michael. It's just one chapter in your story. Her words stayed with him, a beacon of hope as he worked to rebuild his life. Meanwhile, the fallout from Claire and Daniel's actions played out in public. News of the financial fraud spread quickly, tarnishing Daniel's reputation and leading to his dismissal. Michael learned through mutual acquaintances that Daniel was under investigation by the authorities, his assets frozen, pending the outcome of the case. As for Claire, she faded into obscurity. Mutual friends avoided her, unwilling to associate with someone who had betrayed so completely. Michael didn't follow her life closely. He had no interest in keeping tabs on her. She had become a distant memory, a cautionary tale of misplaced trust. Months later, Michael found himself standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the community center. The building was a testament to his resilience, its clean lines and sustainable design a reflection of his renewed sense of purpose. As he stood on the podium, addressing the crowd, he felt a surge of pride. He spoke about the importance of community, of coming together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The applause that followed was thunderous, but it was the private satisfaction that meant the most to him. Later that evening, Michael returned to his apartment and poured himself a glass of wine. He stood on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The betrayal no longer defined him. It had shaped him, certainly, but it hadn't broken him. In fact, it had made him stronger, more aware of his own worth, more determined to protect what mattered most. He had learned to trust himself again, and that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. The past was a closed chapter, but the future stretched out before him, filled with possibilities. Michael raised his glass to the night sky, a quiet toast to resilience and new beginnings. It was time to move forward.